So how do you even pronounce this thing? Some people say JSON, other people say JSON. It doesn't really matter. Just choose the one that sounds best to you and stick with it. So what does JSON stand for? Well, JavaScript Object Notation. And it is a lightweight data format to store and exchange information. So what is it used for? Well, normally you'll see it being used between client and server operations or for configuration settings. In terms of the Power Platform, you'll use it to pass data between Power Apps and Power Automate. For custom connectors, you can reach out to an API. Even within Power Automate, sometimes you'll see it being used from action to action. And SharePoint is another use case where JSON is commonly used. Let's talk a little bit about JSON syntax. There's only 5 elements you need to know: the curly braces or French braces, the quotation marks, colon, comma, and square brackets. In its simplest form, we're just talking about name value pairs that are separated by commas and encapsulated by French braces. Let's look at a complex example that will allow us to use all these elements and talk a little bit more about data types. Before we get to that complex example, let's look at JSON data types. There are basically 6 we need to know: strings, which are text surrounded by quotes; numbers, which can be whole, decimal, negative, and or even scientific notation; booleans, which can be true or false; nulls, which are empty values; arrays, which are values separated by commas and encapsulated by square brackets; and objects. Objects is a special case where it's one object, but it can encapsulate all of the above. Let's go look at this complex example and delve a little bit further into this. The first thing you want to do is make sure that you have open and close curly braces. Then you want to make sure that you use a name or key value pair, that your name is surrounded by quotes and separates the name from the value with a colon. Your value must then end with a comma if you're going to add more key value pairs or name value pairs. Let's see how this example utilizes all 5 of the data types we talked about. First of all, we have a string, which is Power Platform PhD. The second one, we have an integer of 2024. The third one is going to be a Boolean value of true. The fourth one is going to be a null value. And the fifth one is a complex object, which has actually 2 different elements to it. It has a string Power Platform stuff and the array, which is Power Apps, Power Automate, Dataverse, and SharePoint as values of the array. Before we move on to the demo, I'd like to talk about one last thing, and that's case. Case will be what you'll use when you're using a convention for making your keys or names for your key value pairs. And there's 4 main popular ones: Pascal, Camel, Snake, and Kebab. Let's look at these 4 together, and then maybe you can determine which one you want to use. Starting with Pascal case, you can see that each word begins with an uppercase letter. So the Y and the C are capitalized in this case. Camel case begins with a lowercase letter, but then every word after that begins with an uppercase. So C is uppercase in this example. Snake and Kebab always use lowercase letters, but they divide them either by an underscore or a hyphen. Just pick one and stick with it. Demo time. Let's go ahead and move on over to Power Automate and see how we can use JSON in the Power Platform. Okay, here we are. So what we're looking at is a brand new Power Automate. And we're going to go ahead first thing and add a compose action. So let me type in compose. And then in the compose, I'm going to go ahead and paste in the JSON that we've been using pretty much throughout this whole video. And then I'm also going to add a new action, and this one is the parse JSON action. So scroll here and click on that. So the first thing we want to do is take the outputs from this compose action. So compose has our JSON object in it for this demo. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on the dynamic thing, click on the outputs, and in this little this variable is going to take the output of that JSON from the initial compose. Now there's the wrong way to do this and the right way. So the wrong way is to say, hey, I'm just going to go ahead and paste in the JSON, and that's my schema. This is the wrong way. The right way, let me delete that first, is to use this sample payload to generate schema. Click on that link. It's going to open up a pop-up. Go ahead and click on that, paste in your JSON object. And what it's going to do is it's going to iterate through it. And as you can see, it'll say, hey, this is an object. These are the properties. So you'll have like a YouTube channel, which is a type string. So if you go down this whole thing, you can kind of see we have all the variables that we were using before. We have a string, we have an integer, we have a Boolean. It doesn't use the keyword null, but it does use an empty object, which is the same thing as a null reference. And then later on down, and that other nested object, we have two properties, and one is again a string, and then we have an array of type string. So I went ahead and ran a test on what we have so far, and I want to show you. So if I click on parse JSON, you can see in the action that these are the initial raw inputs that we get from the compose action. So here's the content. This is our schema. And as we scroll down, you can see the outputs that come from this action. So we get the full body, which we can see a little bit better by clicking on the show raw output. So this is the initial JSON that we put in. So we know we've gone through a few steps, but this will all make sense in a little bit. So not only do we have this full body, but we also have the individual properties for, let's say, the YouTube channel, for the year, the Boolean value for his JSON cool, etc., etc. We also have this array. So I'm going to go ahead and show you one way we can pull this array, because usually those are a little bit more difficult. Okay, so one way we can do this is by creating a new action and looking up the initialize variable action. And we're going to go ahead and name this JSON array of type array. And for the initial value, I'm going to go ahead and select the body array from the parse JSON action. So from its output, it's going to consume that, initialize this array variable with this body action, this body array from parse JSON. So let's go ahead and run that. Okay, we're back. As you can tell, I've run this flow, and we're going to click on the initialize variable and see that now we have the array value here as the input. This is one way to do it, but I think there's a better way using compose. Okay, through the power of video editing, we are back. All I've done is added these three composes and this email action. So out of these three composes, I just renamed them so they make sense. So this is, we're going to try to pull the full JSON object. The compose, we're trying to extract just the year. And then on the last one, we're going to pull just the array. And these get progressively more difficult. So let me show you the compose full JSON. So there's a couple ways. If you click this little dynamic lightning bolt thing, you could just click on body and that will do it for you. If you mouse over the variable, you can see what's in the actual Power Effects function. So you have the function body, and then inside of that, you're passing the name of the action that you're pulling from, which is parse JSON. So you could either type out, no, let's just do it. So let's go here, go to function. I'm going to type out body, and then I'm going to go ahead and then in quotation marks, single quotes, mind you, we're going to say parse underscore JSON and then say add. And so now if I mouse over it again, you can still see the same thing where it's parse underscore JSON. So this was named parse JSON with the space in it. When you're using these functions inside of the Power Effects and Power Automate, you have to use an underscore for those actions. So body parse underscore JSON. Okay, so now we're going to do to the year what we did to the full JSON. But I'm just going to paste in some code here so that we don't waste a whole bunch of time watching me typing. So under inputs, I'm going to select the Power Effects, type in body. So this is exactly what we wrote to get the full JSON object. But to target the year, we have to add this question mark and then the key between brackets and quotes. So I'm going to add that and mouse off of that, and you can see that error goes away. Let's look at compose again real quick so we can see the full JSON object. So as you can see, YouTube channel, year, all these are first level key value pairs. Now to get to the array, we have to go to the example object first and then drill down into array. So what does that look like? Let me go ahead and click on array. we do the exact same thing. Click on the FX, type in body, parse JSON, gets the full JSON. Now we want to go to the first level example object, second level array. Select add. And then for the email, this is the easy part. Now that we've done all the hard work, let me go ahead and put in for the subject. We'll go ahead and select, I don't know, YouTube channel name. First video posted Friday the 13th. And we'll go ahead and look at all the dynamic data. We select the year that we just did is JSON cool. We didn't do a compose for that, but it is in the body. So here body is JSON cool. And then give me an example of some array stuff. I'm going to go ahead and do a couple returns there and select the output to our array. And then I'm going to go ahead and test it. Okay, we're back. We ran it, and now it's done. I can go ahead and click on email, and we can see this is the email. So we return Friday 13th, 2024. The value was true, and then this is the array that was pulled back. Awesome. So let's go back to the flow, and we can actually just look at some of these actions to see what was kind of returned. So again, the full JSON, right? So we compose this from the parse JSON. This is the full JSON. You can see the raw inputs and the outputs, right? And then for the year, does a little weird thing and does a little comma here inside this little view. But when you actually saw it in the email, it does not have that comma. So it's just something weird that Power Automate does. And then lastly, we can look at the array. So here's the inputs and the outputs. And then as you can see, when it gets into the email, there's your array. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video on JSON. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you next time on Power Platform PhD.